Scott Laughlin, SiriusXM NHL Radio, joins us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Scott, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, Josh. Pleasure to be back with you again.
I'm glad to have you back. So before we get to any of the other stuff, so the Rangers win the draft lottery. Why should we care?
Well, they are building something fairly quickly in New York when it comes to the Rangers. I think the last couple of years, Josh, Jeff Gordon has done a fantastic job. It seems like just yesterday that they were sending that letter out to their season ticket holding base saying it's going to take some time. We're going to strip this right down. We're going into a full-blown rebuild and the whole bit. Things have turned around relatively quickly there in New York, and it helps to have young prospects like Kaapo Kakko in the mix. Pavel Buchnevich, I think, is going to be counted upon for more and more next year. Then you can plug in Alexis Lafreniere, who's going to be the top pick in the 2020 draft. And he's a guy that instinctively you'll put onto the second line in that left wing position. He's next to Sidney Crosby, the only player ever to win back-to-back CHL Player of the Year honors. So he's got that type of talent. You know, let's make no mistake. This is not Sidney Crosby. This is not a generational type talent. But this is a guy that will play in the top six for the rest of his career, for his entire career, and for New York. I think you instantly plug him into that second-line role, and I think New York just takes another step further. I mean, this is the best news of all for the Rangers fan base, given the fact that they were swept away unceremoniously by the Carolina Hurricanes.
How surprising was it that they got basically run over by the Hurricanes? Because I thought when I saw Lundqvist was going to start game one, I was like, hey, the Rangers, Lundqvist has a good record against Carolina. They might be able to pull this off. And it seemed like Rod Brendamore's boys were just like, we don't care. We're going to win this.
Well, Josh, to your point, I mean, the Rangers have controlled that series matchup for going on about a decade now. And to your point, Henrik Lundqvist was the guy that was in goal for most of those victories over the last 10 years. So when they didn't have Igor Shesterkin to start that series, I mean, it was a blow, but it wasn't a death knell, you wouldn't think, because of the fact that the King had played so well against the Canes for so long now. Goaltending wasn't their problem in that series. I mean, they just couldn't generate enough offense, which is surprising because they went out and they got Artemi Panarin, and he comes to town as a $10 million a year type player. He didn't necessarily have a great series. I think they needed more from Chris Kreider. He's got the big-time contract now. He failed to deliver. I think Mika Zibanejad, too, with his 41 goals this past season, including a 5-goal game earlier in the campaign, he just left a lot to be desired as well. So I think when the Rangers, take a deep breath and they look at their season and where they're at right now, I think they like where they're progressing too. I just think short-term here, they're pretty disappointed in the fact that they didn't really put up much of a fight against the Carolina Hurricanes team that, has a really good mix of good young players led by Sebastian Aho and some veterans who've been there and done that time and time again, guys like Justin Williams.
Scott Laughlin joining us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Scott, let's flip it over to the team that's got the whole area down here going crazy because they are the best team in the city. They are the Flyers, the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. I know last time we talked, you told us, you said, listen, this team is really good. This goaltender is really good. But did they exceed even your expectations in that round robin?
Yeah, I didn't expect them to win the top seed, but full value to it. I think it means a lot to the Philadelphia Flyers. Now you've got a matchup with a Montreal team that I think, Josh, is ripe for the taking. I know they beat the Pittsburgh Penguins, but truth be told, the Penguins are getting to be a little bit long in the tooth. They're going to probably need a shakeup of some sort there in the U.S. Steel City pretty soon. This will be interesting because you've got Carter Hart, the guy that we talked about the last time that we conversed, I think, Josh, and his idol growing up as a kid was Carey Price. So he's going to be looking at Carey Price throughout the rest of this series here, the entirety of the series. And I think he'll be okay. He's got Price-like tendencies, Carter Hart, already. People have made note of that over the last couple of years. I think Philadelphia's got that great mix that we talked about as well of veteran players and young players who've stepped up. I think the best news of all, first of all, we hope that Jake Voracek is good to go for Game 1. AV said earlier today, as all Flyers fans know, that he's going to be a game-time decision after missing the last game of the round robin, Josh. But I think the great thing about the round robin was the fact that the guys that drive the ship now, guys like Konechny and Couturier, didn't need to necessarily carry the freight in that round robin. All that depth scoring led by Scott Laughton really kind of came to the fore. And I think that's the best news of all for the Flyers right now, that they could win the top seed and yet still have their star players perhaps not be at peak performance. They're going to be at peak performance against a Montreal team that I think is quite frankly in over their heads here in this best-of-7 series.
You mentioned Scott Lawton. He was on the Sports Bash earlier today on 97.3 ESPN, and he was asked about the play of this team, and he specifically pointed to Carter Hart. And I remember hearing on multiple broadcasts now, whether it's Brian Boucher, who's played here in Philadelphia, or Kevin Weeks on the NHL Network, and they all keep saying the same thing. They talk about Carter Hart's focus, how focused he is, so he doesn't let anything distract him. I think this guy is playing above even my expectations. And you have to wonder, Scott, is this the kind of goalie that can not just be a winner for the Flyers this year, but for a long time to come in a city that's been looking for a franchise caliber goaltender for over 20 years?
Oh, absolutely. I think Flyers fans should be excited about him. I mean, you look back and look, the ultimate greatest, as we know, was Bernie Parent. The late, great Pelle Lindbergh. I mean, we still listen to this very day. He was destined to become a star in the league as well. Ron Hextall had that great start to his career in Philly, moved on to a couple of different destinations as well. And then they had some pretty good years with Ron. But beyond that, though, of course, as you've mentioned, Josh, I mean, it's been a constant search for that guy who can provide that stability between the pipes. I think Carter Hart definitely is that guy. And we talk about him looking up to Carey Price. There were definite similarities between the two in terms of what they did. When you go back to the time in the Western Hockey League, I mean, Carter Hart was in Everett, had a couple of dynamite seasons where he was arguably the top goaltender in all of junior hockey for a couple of years running. The same could have been said about Carey Price when he played at Tri-City years ago, too. He came in and came out of junior with a couple of years at the World Juniors and such, and his resume was stacked. Beyond that, though, you look at just the mental makeup and the physical makeup of these two goaltenders. Everybody from the get-go with Carey Price, Josh, has noted that he looks like he plays the game in a rocking chair, that nothing really bothers him. It's all water off a duck's back. He's not going to get very upset. He's always going to be calm, cool, and collected. Very rarely do you see him become unhinged. Same thing with Carter Hart. He looks like he's got the same sort of makeup, that sort of calm, cool collectedness. I think that's going to serve the Flyers well, as you say, Josh, not just for this playoff run here, but I think for years to come.
Scott, you mentioned about how the Flyers can beat the Canadiens, but what about after that? Because I think it's been suggested by some that teams like the Bruins and the Lightning, they weren't really firing on all cylinders. So no Steven Stamkos on Saturday night. The Bruins just didn't look like the Boston team that we knew for the regular season. How can the Flyers match up against teams that are going to get their wheels rolling later in the rounds?
Well, I'm not trying to cozy up to the Flyers fan base here, Josh, but I'm going to say this. Each of those teams that we talk about, the teams that remain that we think are the favorites in the Eastern Conference, and Philly's got to be right there now, I think they've all got question marks. Number one, you talk about Tampa. They're going against Columbus. Columbus is a team that we know that swept them away last spring unceremoniously after the Lightning ran roughshod through the NHL during the regular season. And not only that, but there are questions about Victor Hedman's health and whether or not he'll be good to go. Steven Stamkos still has not played yet, didn't play at all in the round robin, so question marks about Stamkos too. So from Tampa's standpoint, plenty of question marks. There are question marks regarding the Boston Bruins too, just because they didn't play well at all during the round robin. Now, Tuukka Rask came out and confirmed that, hey, we weren't that interested, but we'll have to wait and see. They're a veteran-laden crew. Can they step on the gas when it matters most against an up-and-coming Carolina Hurricanes club that's got some good playoff experience here the past couple of years? And I think when you look at the Washington Capitals too, Josh, the questions for the Capitals for me are about Braden Holtby. He's an unrestricted free agent goaltender to come, but Ilya Samsonov, who had an outstanding rookie season as the 1A complement to the Stanley Cup champion from 2 years ago, Braden Holtby, Samsonov is hurt, and he's not going to be good to go during the playoffs. So if Holtby can't bring it, then they're in trouble. And again, he's got a lot to play for here for the Capitals, for some other team that, of course, will be perhaps, venturing forth some sort of an offer for him once he hits the free agent market. But there are questions for all of these teams right now. I think the Flyers have fewer questions than any of the teams we've talked about here, and that's why I think Flyers fans should be excited about this club.
Is Carolina the dark horse in the Eastern Conference playoffs?
Yeah, they could be. They could be, because Dougie Hamilton looks like he's ready to return. He had an outstanding season on the blue line for Carolina before he got hurt. They think that Brett Pesce, another good, solid defenseman for them, could come back, if not to start the series against Boston, perhaps a little bit into it. If not now, then perhaps in the next round, should the Canes make it. I think the 1-2 goaltending punch of Peter Mrazek and James Reimer has more than held its own. And I think you've got an emerging superstar up front in Sebastian Aho, who at times, I think, Josh, in that series sweep against the Rangers, he had 8 points in the 3 games against the Blue Shirts. He kind of owned that series. He kind of took that series over at times. And I think Carolina plays a really good structured team defense, while at the same time still having some speedy forwards. Andrei Svechnikov has been an emerging star as well the past couple of years. So you're right, Josh. I could really make that case that Carolina could be a very, very dangerous animal right about now.
Scott, let's flip it over to the Western Conference because I think some of the most juicy matchups in these playoffs are going to be in the West. You're talking about Vegas versus Chicago. I mean, good grief. I mean, Vegas has Chicago's former goaltender out there. You have Dallas versus Calgary. You have Colorado versus Arizona. I mean, it feels like the Western Conference, you don't even have to write storylines. They're just oozing storylines.
No, absolutely. I picked Vegas, actually, before the season began to win the Stanley Cup. I'm going to have to stand by it just because I don't want to change it in the midst of it here. Vegas, I think, still is the power out west. The defending champs, the Blues, are going to have something to say about it for sure. But Max Pacioretty coming back to practice today for the Golden Knights, Josh, is very significant because he missed all that time, during the round robin for the Golden Knights, and he's worked well with Mark Stone up front. So that gives him a totally different dimension than they had even a couple of years ago when they unexpectedly shocked the world and made the Stanley Cup final. So I really like Vegas out there, and Colorado is just dangerous. I mean, when you've got Nathan McKinnon doing Nathan McKinnon-like things, next to Connor McDavid, probably the best player on the planet right now, that gives them a fighting opportunity. I think that Joe Sakic as well went out during the offseason, addressed some weaknesses with his roster. They brought in a bunch of guys like Kadri and Burakovsky, guys that they think that can supplement that top line, led by McKinnon and the captain Landeskog and Mikko Rantanen, who's coming back healthy now too. So I think Colorado right now, and they've got a two-headed monster in goal themselves, with Cale Makar, an outstanding rookie on the blue line. That's a really, really deep team. And I look at Philadelphia and I look at Colorado in much the same way, because I think these are teams that are good right now that really have the makings to be good for the next 3, 4, 5 years or so.
Scott, one more before I let you go, and I was just mentioning about Robin Lehner. He's from Chicago. He's now with Vegas. On the Flyers, they got Nate Thompson. He was on the Canadiens. He got traded to the Flyers. Do we put any value in the guy from former team on new team giving scouting reports?
I think it's probably less significant, I think, Josh, than it is in the National Football League. I mean, how many times have we seen a guy, who gets cut by one team, picked up the next week by the same team that's about to play their interdivisional rival or that sort of thing? So I think it's probably used more in football than it probably would be in hockey. But look, I mean, these guys, I think, have a chip on their shoulders collectively. They feel like they've got something to prove. And, I think Robin Lehner thanks the Blackhawks for him the opportunity, once the musical chairs stopped last summer, to find a place to play. He signed the 1-year, $5 million contract. He felt he had a lot to prove. Given the opportunity, I think he did so. But I still think he thinks that he's worth a lot more than just 1 year and $5 million. And ostensibly, he's playing for his future and for his next contract as well. I think that Marc-Andre Fleury starts that series for the Golden Knights. Could we see Lehner against his former club before it's all said and done? I think that, clearly could be a possibility. But I think Marc-Andre Fleury, given his track record, given his resume and the Stanley Cup rings that he owns, I think there'll be a longer leash on a guy like Fleury than perhaps some expect.
He's Scott Laughlin. Follow him on Twitter at LaughlinSXM, SiriusXM NHL Radio. Check out the morning skate, the morning show on SiriusXM NHL Radio. Scott Laughlin, the co-host of that show, and it's all guests. He appeared here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Scott, always appreciate talking hockey with you.
Outstanding. Thanks, Josh.